Right, here's what I want you to do. I want you to turn to the person next to you and tell them your favorite Christmas carol. Go. All right, so any Frosty the Snowman out there? I saw Mummy kissing Santa Claus. Oh, Holy Night. Yeah, there's a few. Oh, Come All Ye Faithful. Way in a Manger. Oh, Little Town of Bethlehem. God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. That's my wife's favorite, so I got to remember to say that one now, so I say it at 11. So there's all kinds of songs we love to sing at Christmas. And there's something special about Christmas songs, and maybe that's one of the reasons when you look at the Gospel of Luke, you see the first 2 chapters of Luke are filled with song. There are actually 4 songs in the first 2 chapters of Luke that talk about the birth of Jesus. There's Mary's song, there's Zachariah's song, there's Simeon's song, and there's the angel's song. And we're going to look at each of these songs over these next few weeks. We're going to start today with Mary's song. Next week, we're going to look at Zachariah's song. Then we're going to look at Simeon's song. And then on Christmas Eve, we're going to look at the angel's song. And so we're going to look at the songs of Christmas found in the Gospel of Luke. And as I just mentioned, today we're going to start with Mary's song. Mary's song has traditionally been called the Magnificat. And it's called the Magnificat because that's a Latin term for the opening word of the song. It means to magnify. This song, Mary's song, holds a very important place in church history. For over 2,000 years, the song has been sung by Christians around the world. Now, unfortunately, we as evangelicals don't know much about the Magnificat. But in other parts of Christianity, the Magnificat, Mary's song, is a very important part of Christian worship. The Magnificat is actually the longest set of spoken words in the New Testament by a woman. And it's also considered one of the most revolutionary documents ever written. E. Stanley Jones, a great Methodist preacher, said he called Mary's song the most revolutionary document in the history of the world. In fact, in the 20th century, there were at least 3 incidences of governments banning the public recitation of the Magnificat. They feared its message was far too subversive. During the British rule in India, the Magnificat was prohibited from being sung in churches. In the 1980s, the Guatemalan government discovered Mary's words about God's preferential love for the poor were too dangerous and too revolutionary. And so her words, what was happening was her words were inspiring the Guatemalan poor to believe that change was possible. Thus, the government banned any public recitation of Mary's song. Similarly, in Argentina, when the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, whose children had disappeared during the Dirty War, placed the Magnificat's words on posters throughout the Capitol Plaza, that caused the military in Argentina to outlaw any display of Mary's song. Mary's song is a revolutionary song. But before we look at the song, let's get some context from which the song was sung. One day, as you probably well know, an angel appeared to a teenager named Mary, who was at the time a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph. And the angel said in verse 30 this, "Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you are to call him Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. His kingdom will never end." Mary then asked an obvious question. How can this be since I'm a virgin? To which the angel replied in verse 35, "The Holy Spirit will come on you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So the Holy One will be born, the Holy One to be born will be called the Son of God. Even Elizabeth, your relative, is going to have a child in her old age, and she who it was said to be unable to conceive is in her 6th month. For no word from God will ever fail." That alone, that phrase there is something some of you need to hear this morning. For no word from God will ever fail. And I love Mary's response in verse 38. She says, "I am the Lord's servant. May your word to me be fulfilled." And you may be thinking, of course she responded that way. She had just been chosen to give birth to Jesus, the Messiah. Of course she's going to say, "God, I'm all yours." In reality, Mary's future looked very bleak. You need to understand, back then when an unwed teenage peasant girl was found to be pregnant, that usually meant a devastating retribution from the community. It was a very real possibility that Mary could be stoned to death for adultery. And so her response was anything but just a calm, "Sure, God." Her future looked bleak. And I think Mary wasn't sure what to do, and so she ran over to Elizabeth's house once the angel departed. And when Mary entered the house, and Elizabeth, who was, as the scriptures tell us, 6 months pregnant at that time, when Elizabeth heard Mary's voice, the baby in Elizabeth's womb jumped. And Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. And then in verse 42, she says, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the child you will bear." And that did it. First the angel's words, and then Elizabeth's affirmation, and Mary started to sing. Now her song is divided into 2 stanzas. Stanza 1 is verses 46 to 50 of Luke 1. And in this stanza, as we'll see, Mary is reflecting on what it means for her to be chosen to bear the Messiah. Her words are personal, and her point of view is internal. And then in stanza 2, verses 51 to 55, she's praising God for the effects that the coming of Jesus will have on the world. And her point of view is outward, and her words are global. So let's listen to these beautiful words. Stanza 1 first, starting in verse 46 of Luke 1. And Mary said, really Mary sung, "My soul glorifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he has been mindful of the humble state of his servant. From now on, all generations will call me blessed. For the Mighty One has done great things for me. Holy is his name. His mercy extends to those who fear him from generation to generation." Mary began her song by magnifying God, and then she said in verse 48, "For he has been mindful of the humble state of his servant. From now on, all generations will call me blessed." Mary was just another poor girl among thousands of poor girls who lived in backwater towns in a captive nation. Thus, she was astonished that God had chosen her of all people to bear the Messiah. I mean, God could have chosen a poor peasant girl. God had chosen, a poor peasant girl when he could have chosen any girl to be the mother of the Messiah. And yet he chose a poor peasant girl in a backwater town, and Mary couldn't get over that. Isn't it just like God to choose the most unlikely for the greatest privilege any woman would ever know? No wonder Mary said, "From now on, all generations will call me blessed." She had no idea how true that statement was going to be. Listen, maybe you're here this morning and you think you're too insignificant, too lowly for God to use. My word to you is think again. Think again. God picked an educated, poor peasant girl from a backwater town to be the mother of the Messiah. God can use you. God can use you. And then in verse 49 it says, "For the mighty one has done great things for me. Holy is his name. His mercy extends to those who fear him from generation to generation." Mary's God was the mighty one, a God of great mercy, whose name was holy. There was no one mightier than her God. He alone was able. With him, nothing was impossible. And thus, Mary realized she had nothing to fear. Even though her future could be bleak, even though she could be stoned to death, she had nothing to fear. And that's a great truth that some of us need to know as well. That God is mighty. That God is holy. That God is able. That nothing is impossible with God. And when you're walking with that kind of God, when that kind of God is alive in your life, you literally have nothing to fear. Know that. And now as we move into the second stanza, the focus shifts from Mary to the world around her. Listen to these words in verse 51. He has performed mighty deeds with his arm. He has scattered those who are proud in their inmost thoughts. He has brought down rulers from their thrones, but has lifted up the humble. He has filled the hungry with good things, but has sent the rich away empty. He has helped his servant Israel, remembering to be merciful to Abraham and his descendants forever, just as he promised our ancestors. You'll notice here that Mary's using the past tense. She says, he has performed, he has scattered, he has brought down. Now, when Mary says he, she's referring to Jesus. And when she says has, she was talking about what Jesus would do. So the logical question for us is, how could Mary speak in the past tense about what Jesus was going to do in the future? He hadn't even been born yet. Well, if you read the prophets in the Bible, you would see that sometimes they look into the future and they're so certain about what they see that they use the past tense to describe what for them is a very certain future event. And that's what Mary's doing here. Mary here is so utterly convinced about what Jesus would do when he came. She spoke of it as if it had already happened. Let's go back to verse 51. He has performed mighty deeds with his arm. He has scattered those who are proud in their inmost thoughts. He has brought down rulers from their thrones, but has lifted up the humble. Mary said that when Jesus came, he would bring down the proud and the rulers from their thrones. In other words, when God came to earth in the form of a human being, he was reminding all creation who is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And kings and queens and presidents and prime ministers may sit on the thrones, but they should remember who is God, and it's not them. Remember Daniel? Chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar, God brought him down before Nebuchadnezzar turned to God, and then God raised him up again. And notice here, Mary says that while God tears down rulers and the proud, he lifts up the humble. One day, that will be fully and finally realized. One day, God is going to say enough. One day, as the prophet Amos says, justice will flow like water and righteousness with an unfailing stream. One day, all things will be set right. And then look at verse 33. He has filled the hungry with good things. He has sent the rich away empty. Not only would the coming of Jesus upset the proud of this world, not only would it lift up the humble, but the hungry would be fed and the rich would go empty. Those who put their trust in their riches rather than in God would go away empty. Do you see what Jesus was going to do? Jesus was going to turn everything on its head. The weak would dethrone the mighty. The humble would scatter the proud. The nobodies would be exalted. The hungry would be filled, and the rich would end up poor. Now I wonder, I was thinking about this week. I wonder if Mary expected the Messiah, expected Jesus to use his might and power to forcefully remove the oppressive rulers of her day. People like King Herod. Soon after singing or reciting the Magnificat, Mary walked 110 kilometers to the small rural town of Bethlehem. And soon after arriving in Bethlehem, as we all know, she started to go into labor, and there in that insignificant village, Mary gave birth to Jesus. And looking southeast from where Jesus lay in that feeding trough, Mary would have seen Herod's great, magnificent palatial resort called the Herodium. And here's a picture of the mountain, and on the top of that mountain was this amazing palace called the Herodium. Everyone could see it. It was at its time the largest palatial complex in the world. It was huge. And I wonder, as Mary looked up at Herod's luxurious resort, I wonder if she found herself silently singing the Magnificat once again, praying for God to topple rulers like Herod. I wonder if that's what she was expecting. And then we come to verse 54 where it says, he has helped his servant Israel, remembering to be merciful to Abraham and his descendants forever, just as he promised our ancestors. You notice Mary concluded her song by praising God for sending Jesus into the world and thus keeping his promises to Abraham. Something like 70 generations had come and gone between Abraham and Mary, and now, after all these years, Mary was seeing the fulfillment of what her ancestors only dreamed about. It's a magnificent song. But do you grab its significance? When God sent his son into the world, he picked the most unlikely girl to be the mother. He picked a forgotten province in the Roman Empire. He then found a most backwater hometown, and then he arranged for his son to be born in a stable and put in a feeding trough. The message of Mary's song is that God is on the side of the lowly. He's on the side of the hurting. He's on the side of the poor. He's on the side of the oppressed. He's on the side of the hungry. He's at home with the humble and the tired and the weak and the lowly of this world. Do you see why this song is so revolutionary? When Mary sung that the Messiah would be the one who topples rulers, she sung that he would be the one who scatters the proud. He would be the one who sends the rich away empty-handed. And at the same time, he would be the one who raises up the humble, raises up the poor, raises up the downtrodden. In this song, we see God's preferential love for the poor and the oppressed. Do you see why this song was banned? This song empowers the poor. It empowers the oppressed. For them to read this song, they say, God is on our side. He's going to raise us up. He's going to bring the oppressors down. And so let's go. Do you see why the song was banned? Had Mary sung this song among the peasants of Israel in Nazareth, they would have shouted, "It's about time. Blessed be the Lord." She probably would have started a revolution. You need to understand that at Advent, at Christmas, Jesus came to turn everything upside down. In his first public sermon, Jesus read from the Old Testament book of Isaiah. He read a passage to declare who he was and what he was going to be about. Listen to these words from Luke chapter 4, starting in verse 18. "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Notice what Jesus came to do. He came to preach good news to the poor. And what's the good news? That the kingdom had come, and within that, redemption and restoration. He came to bring freedom for the prisoners, sight to the blind. He came to release the oppressed. Do you see it? The poor, the blind, the oppressed, the prisoner. God has a special heart for the less fortunate. What God started in Bethlehem was a spiritual, moral, and economic revolution whose effects are still being felt today. And that's why secular humanists don't want Christmas in the public square. They understand the implications of Christmas better than most Christ followers do. You see, what we celebrate is Christmas. What we celebrate at Christmas is the turning of secular values of this world on their head. Our problem is, here in Victoria, we've got so much money. We've got so much wealth. We've got so much worldly prosperity that we want to spend what we want to spend. And we want to spend it on what we want to spend it on. We want to live how we want to live. We want to do what we want to do. And we rather not, if we're honest, worry too much about the poor and the oppressed. And yet imagine for a minute. Imagine you and your family live in Africa. Picture that in your mind. And you're desperate for food. You're desperate for water. And then imagine what your attitude would be towards Christ followers in North America as you hear them complain about not having enough. Or imagine you live in India and you're impoverished. You're a family of 4 living in a rural part of India. Used to be a family of 5, but you had to sell one of your daughters into slavery so the rest of the family could survive another month. How would you feel if you were to watch the daily routines of the average Christ follower in North America? Let me ask you a question, and at the same time ask myself the same question. Does your use of time and money make sense in light of the suffering in the world today? Does your use of time and money make sense in light of the suffering in the world today? Canadians are about to go out and spend billions of dollars on Christmas, buying gifts for people that they'll never use because they feel they need to. And yet, listen, if Christmas teaches us anything, it teaches us that God did not come to aid the self-sufficient and the proud and the greedy. If Christmas teaches us anything, it teaches us that when God sent His Son, He deliberately took the side of the forgotten people of this world. And that's why the Magnificat is so revolutionary. Because there we see that God has a heart for the poor and the oppressed. And if God has a special heart for the poor and the hungry and the homeless and the hurting and the lonely, then so should we. I would suggest that we need to let our lives be gripped by the same kind of compassion that gripped the life of Jesus, a compassion that creates within us a special heart for the poor and for the hungry, a compassion that chooses compassion over consumption, a compassion that moves us into action. Mary's song should be a song that motivates the church of Jesus Christ to have a heart for the poor and the oppressed of our city and of the world. The question should not be, how can God bless me? The question we should be asking is, how can God use me to bless the poor? This Christmas, can I challenge you to change the question from not what can I get, but what can I give? How can you be Jesus for someone this Christmas? My wife and I were talking about that very thing last night. How can we be Jesus for someone this Christmas? How can you be Jesus for someone this Christmas? The Magnificat is truly a revolutionary song that turned everything on its head. Let me ask you this morning as we close, as Jesus turned things upside down in your life to the point where you have a heart for the poor, has Jesus turned things upside down in your life to where you have not just the heart, but his heart for the poor? Jesus came to change the world. He came to transform lives. He came to turn everything upside down. And today he says to us, come, let's change the world. Let's transform lives together. Do you have the heart for the poor that Jesus had? It's probably hard for us to hear that God has this preferential love for the poor, but the Bible's clear about that. The question is, how are we going to respond? How are we going to respond? Well, just before I pray, I want to give you a very real way to respond. And I didn't realize we'd be launching this today when I planned several months ago to speak on this today, but we are launching our Serve the City Christmas edition today. And it's a practical chance for you to go make a difference in the lives of people that need it. We want to help families this Christmas. And in the back of the room, there are a number of trees, and those trees represent different organizations. And on those trees are ornaments, and those ornaments represent real needs in real families. The ornaments represent people in need, and there's several trees back there. I'll just give you we got the Victorious Transition House. We have women and kids in need down there, and we've got ornaments back there that represent those people. We have the Cridge Center for the family. We have 4 families from the Cridge Center back there who are in transitional housing. They're hanging on those trees. We have the One Up Society, which is a great organization that does work with single parents. We have 4 One Up Society families back there, 4 single-parent families who need Christmas. We have Angel Tree. Angel Tree is a great ministry. In partnership with Prison Fellowship Ministries, we're reaching out to 18 local children whose fathers are incarcerated. Stelly School. Our church, along with some other churches in Central Saanich community, have been approached by Stelly School to provide hampers for needy families this Christmas. And there's 30 families in need, and SBC has taken 5 of those families. And finally, there's Peers, which is a resource that supports local sex trade workers, and we are supporting them through gift bags. It's personal items such as gloves, scarves, hygiene products, etc. So here's the deal. After the service, when Luke's led us in a final song, I want you to flood back to those trees. It's going to be crowded. You might have to wait. If you hate lines like me, it's going to be frustrating, but live with it. And go back there and pick those. Don't pick them totally clean, but almost pick them clean. We want the 11 and 6 to have some. But we want you to go back there. I want you to grab an ornament or 2. And we then want you to go to the table that's by the tree, and they will give you more information on that family. And we want you to go out and we want to serve the city by blessing those who are under-resourced. Jesus wants us to have a heart for the poor. I think as Christ followers, that is not an option. We need to be like the one we follow. And we have a king that we serve who has a special heart for the poor and the oppressed of this world. We need to be part of that journey with him. And one way we can do it is through Serve the Cities. There's lots of other ways. But I just pray that we will be a church, we will be a people who live out the Magnificat.